So I'm recording a video for you because I believe that's more useful than just fixing the project and returning it to you. So I copied the original scene, which I believe is test 5. This is the one that you were originally working on. So this would be the end result you get at the end of this video. I guess this is what you were originally going for. So let's get started. Pretty much everything that could be wrong in this scene is wrong in the worst possible way, but that's fine. I'm going to go over each individual problem and tell you why it's wrong and how to fix it. So if we click play on your scene, the first thing we notice is that the cloth is behaving, well, pretty much it doesn't resemble cloth at all. So if you select the cloth object, the first thing that caught my attention is that you have the stretching scale of distance constraints set to 0. If we go to the manual and open the distance constraints page, you will see that stretching scale is a scale factor for the rest length of each constraint in the cloth. That means the length of each edge in the mesh. So if you set it to 0.5, you're basically telling the cloth to be 75% of its original size. If you set it to 1, it's the original size, and if you set it to a value larger than 1, it's bigger than the original size. If you set this to 0, you're basically telling the cloth to clump into a single point as much as possible, which is obviously not what you want. You want this to be 1 or 100%. The next thing is the bend compliance in the bend constraints. Compliance is basically a synonym for stiffness. So, sorry, for stiffness, no, the opposite, elasticity. So if you set this to 1, you're basically telling the cloth to bend as much as possible. This should be set to 0 or a very small value like 0.01. Max bending is the minimum value, the minimum bending value above which the bend compliance kicks in. So again, this should be lower. And then for tether constraints, you have the tether scale set to 0.1, which is similar to the stretching scale. So you're again telling the cloth to just clump into a point. This should be 1, and the compliance of the tether should be a very small value, like this. Okay, I'm going to save the scene as an intermediate scene with all the changes we've made so far. So test intermediate. Okay. And if we click play now, you'd see that at least the cloth doesn't do anything weird anymore. Now if I try to move around one of these guys, let me make it kinematic. In fact, I'm going to make all of them kinematic. If I move this one around, only the bottom corners of the cloth are moving. This is because if you select the cloth, all the particle attachments are attached to the corners particle group in the cloth, which if you go to the cloth blueprint and select the corners group here, you will see it's just these 2 vertices. This is probably not what you want. You want each individual cube to be attached to the corresponding corner. So what I did here is I created 4 individual particle groups. These aren't in the original blueprint because none of the sample scenes use it. But if you want to create a custom group, you basically just select the particles you want and then click the plus sign here, custom group, or whatever name you want to give it to it. So then you can select the particles in each group. That's the way you do that. There's nothing more to it. So yeah, I created these 4 groups, and now we are going to attach each individual cube to the correct corner. I'm going to flip the cloth over because it was 180 degrees flipped in the other direction, and then I'm going to say cube number 1 is attached, to corner number 1, cube number 2 attached to corner number 2, and cube 3, I believe, is this guy here. I created the corners in this order: 1, 2, 3, and 4. So cube 3 would be attached to corner 4. And cube 4 would be attached to corner 3. Okay, let's test this thing out. Okay, so this is okay, this is okay, this one's okay too, and this one is, I should probably have made them kinematic to avoid this. Okay, so yeah, now we have each cube attached to the correct corner, and I noticed you have a net move script here, which I modified. This was your original script. It looked something like this. So basically what you are doing, you're adding a force every frame to each cube in the local forward direction. Let's see what this does to the cubes. Okay, I'm going to set the speed to 2. And if we click play, I'm going to pause immediately once it gets into play mode. Okay, so as the simulation advances, as you can see, the cubes are getting rotated because the cloth is pulling from them, and they start moving in the direction of their local forward axis, which is this blue arrow here. So this has the effect of them just going around, making a weird path, because they are constantly moving in whatever direction they are facing, because you're applying a force in that direction. So you probably wanted them to just move forward in a straight line. So instead of doing this, you need to just set their initial velocity at the start and set that to their forward direction at the start of the scene, which is just against the capsule collider here. Okay, Unity, do your thing. Okay. What else? Okay, so in the solver, I noticed that if you go to constraints, you've set the relaxation factor for distance constraints to 0.1. If you go to the manual in the solver, right at the end, you have relaxation factor, and this is basically a multiplier for the strength of the constraints. It says here values lower than 1 will only partially enforce constraints. For instance, if you use a relaxation factor of 0.25, constraints will only have a 25% of their normal effect. So by setting this to 0.1, you're basically telling the cloth you can be pretty much as stretchy as you want, which is not the case here. You need to set this to 1 or 100%. For collisions, you're telling collisions to do 2000%, 200% of their work, which is again not what you want. And these guys here, stretch and shear and bend and twist, can just be disabled because they are used for rods and ropes. If you go to the simulation page, or all constraints are listed, you will see that stretch, shear and bend twists are only used by rods and bones, which are part of another OB package. So another thing, you could be lower on the iterations here. And let's click play now. Spoiler alert, it won't work correctly yet. Okay, so now it is much closer to what we want, but ideally these things should just move in a straight line forward instead of the cubes rotating as soon as they start moving. The reason why it is still doing that thing is because the cloth is not moving at all. It has no initial velocity. For all this stuff to move together forward, you need to give the cloth the same initial velocity as we did to the cubes. And in order to do that, you have to write a custom script that goes over all particles in the cloth and then sets their velocity to the same one we're using in the rigid bodies. So I wrote this script, and then you use that in the cloth move, set it to the same speed we were using for the rigid bodies, and if now we click play, it's finally working as it should. So still there's no collision detection between these guys, and that's because you have surface collisions enabled, but the blueprint you're using doesn't have surface collisions created. So just disable that. And finally you have something going on. This guy here is not kinematic, but it has position and rotation freezed. And another thing that I notice is wrong is that this guy here is set to collide with the cloth, which it really shouldn't. It should not collide with anything, which is what all his bodies here are set to. So let's click play one last time, and hopefully this will work as intended. Okay, now what's happening here? Well, the capsule collider you're using, as you can see here in the green lines, is not matching up with the mesh of the capsule collider. It's sideways because you're using the wrong axis here. So set that to the y-axis so that the collider and the mesh match. And now I promise it's the last time we click play, this will work correctly. There we go. Okay, so I believe this is everything. If you have any questions or you want some clarification about anything, because this was a lot of stuff condensed in just one video, I know. So if you have any questions, just tell me and I will do my best to answer you. See you.